Christian Apologetics Lesson 21. Today we are evaluating theism as a worldview. It does seem only fair that since, as we've gone through the 7 other worldviews and their arguments, we have evaluated those worldviews and we have criticized their arguments in areas where criticism is reasonable. It seems only fair then that we would look at what criticisms of theistic arguments are also valid. I mentioned yesterday that there are some arguments for the existence of God that I find more credible than others. Some to me seem weaker than others. Um, because of that, I try to avoid getting tangled up in what I would see as the weaker ones when I'm trying to have a conversation with an atheist or a deist or a polytheist. Why use an argument that I think is weak? I think I'm far better off to stick to stronger arguments like the cosmological argument for God that we looked at yesterday, which is essentially based, once again, in the basic metaphysical laws, the first principles of existence, which we spent a lot of time talking about in this class. So let's take a look then at some valid criticisms against the theistic arguments. First of all, let's read together the introductory paragraph from Geisler. Theism has been subject to many criticisms. They fall roughly into 2 classifications. First, those that attempt to disprove theism via some argument for atheism. These were discussed in chapter 14. Second, those criticisms that attempt to prove that theism is not true. The latter category may be divided into 2 groups: those based on a priori type arguments and those based on a posteriori type arguments. Okay, so just to review our Latin classes from earlier in the semester, a priori means from before, posteriori means from after. Okay, and when we're talking about the theories of knowledge, a priori knowledge is knowledge that essentially we are born with. And I like to use the illustration of firmware versus software. Uh, Firmware is what a computer comes hard programmed with, right? Um, Software is something you add typically after you buy it. You can, of course, buy software in a computer, but that's not necessary for this analogy. It comes off the factory line with certain firmware hard coded into the machine, right? That think of that as like a priori knowledge. Every person is born with certain innate, certain natural knowledge that comes with us, and then a posteriori are arguments that, or excuse me, are knowledge that we gain as we grow. Um, and so when we're talking about a priori arguments and a posteriori arguments, we're talking about arguments that are based on things that are innate versus things that we learn. Okay, so um, we're going to start with valid criticisms against theistic arguments in the strictly a priori arguments about God. Those are invalid. Okay, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, and many others have made a lot of valid arguments against the a priori arguments. Non-theists have been correct in observing that there is an invalid move in every purely ontological type argument. Do you remember me saying yesterday um, that I find the ontological argument for God to be the weakest argument in the theistic arsenal? Um, well, Geisler is about to agree with me, which he usually does. Purely ontological type arguments are weak because they assume too many things. Okay, so one cannot argue mere concept of an absolutely perfect or necessary being to its existence. Okay. Um, Let me make sure we read that sentence together. One cannot argue from the mere concept of an absolutely perfect or necessary being to its existence. Theist Anselm and theist Descartes tried this, but failed. So, and this has always been my problem with the ontological argument. Okay, essentially, its weakness comes down to this. If we conceptualize the absolute being, the ultimate being, the perfect being, the necessary being, then we can argue that in order to be the absolute, the perfect, the ultimate, the necessary being, such a being must exist, or they're not really the absolute, perfect, or necessary being, and therefore God exists. In my world, we have a simple term for that line of reasoning. It's called double talk, right? Circular reasoning. You start with the premise, and then you use your premise to prove itself. Okay, um, we get frustrated when non-theists do the same thing in their arguments, and yet this argument essentially does that exact same thing. Okay, um, I won't take the time to walk through some of how the logic works on the ontological argument. There are YouTube videos available that aren't very long. The ontological argument doesn't take long to put out, so you can find a 5 to 10 minute video if you're interested in how that argument works or how these arguments work. He goes on to say the rational is not the real. Neither is the rationally inescapable the real. For even if it is logically necessary to conceive of a necessary being as necessarily existing, it does not follow that it necessarily does exist. It might be necessary to think that it exists, but it does not prove that it really does exist. It is necessary to think of triangles with three sides on them. There is no other way to think of triangles. However, it is still possible that no triangles exist. And I would point out that I think Geisler's continual use of the triangle analogy um, is a good one, but I would point out that Geisler's definition of a triangle is wrong. Geisler argues that a triangle is a triangle because it has three sides. Is that true? No, it's not called a tri-side. It's called a triangle. It is a triangle because it has three angles. But because it has three angles, it necessarily has three sides, right? And that's the problem we get into a lot of times when we're trying to make logical arguments. It becomes easy to make a basic error. And then, by the way, that's a very small error and it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, right? But it illustrates that when you begin with a definitional error, it's so easy to fall into the pattern of keep saying it over and over again, but you leave a fatal flaw in your argument. Okay. Um, However, it is still possible that no triangles exist. So, however you're defining the triangle as three angles or three sides, you could argue that you can't be a triangle if you don't have three angles. You could argue that if you're a triangle, you must have three sides, but you cannot prove that a triangle exists simply by saying this is what a triangle is. Okay? All the non theists must show is that there is a logical possibility that a necessary being does not exist. And that's the problem. Okay? So, point counterpoint. Can a necessary being not exist? Or more to the point, is it necessary that a necessary being does exist? Everyone's instinctively going to say, well, yeah, but the question is, what's your argument for it? And That's what we went through yesterday with the taking the first principles of being and applying them to the concept of a necessary being. Because I do exist and I am a contingent being, there must be a necessary being that causes my existence. That is, of course, the short version, but let's go ahead and move forward. Um, the point can be readily illustrated from the fact that it is a logical possibility that nothing ever existed, including God. The non existence of everything is a logically conceivable state of affairs. Now, understand the difference between conceivable and reasonable. Okay? It's conceivable that nothing ever existed. It's not reasonable that nothing ever existed because in order to argue that nothing ever existed, I have to exist, right? It's not reasonable, but it's conceivable that nothing ever existed. Okay? It is conceivable that none of us could be here, right? I don't mean it's conceivable right now. I mean, there could have been a reality where God created nothing, right? It's conceivable that there could be nothing. The non existence of everything is a logically conceivable state of affairs. If the if the if a theist objects that the stop doing that. If the theist objects that the proposition nothing exists is unaffirmable without self-destruction, the non-theist may correctly reply that it is true only because one is really beginning with the actual existence of the affirmer, right? The only reason I can say that the supposition that nothing exists isn't true is because you and I are both here to have the conversation. Okay. But to argue that something actually exists and undeniably so, i.e., an affirmer, therefore it is an unaffirmable that nothing exists, is not the same as arguing from the mere inconceivability of the non-existence of a necessary being. Okay. So to put it simply, go to the last sentence on this page. There is no purely rational, a priori way to prove God's existence. Instead, we need an argument that is posteriori that God exists. But those are also insufficient by themselves. Simply put, if I can summarize this in one sentence, you can't logic your way to God. You can't logic your way to proving God exists to an atheist. Okay? It's logical that God exists to me, but I have never been an atheist. Does that make sense? It's inescapable to me that God exists. It's undeniable that God exists. But understand, I've always started from a theistic worldview. When you're trying to step outside of your worldview and just make a credible, logical argument, you run into this problem that you realize you are assuming too many things. Non-theists are correct in observing many of the faults in a posteriori argument. Some will be briefly stated here. Let's just look at the statements. Factual statements are never logically necessary. Can someone give me an example of a factual statement?
Of a what statement?
Factual. Factual.
The sun rises in the east.
Okay. Is it logically necessary that the sun rises in the east? What if the earth was rotating the opposite direction?
Wouldn't that just wouldn't that just change the facts then? So then it would just our facts wouldn't be the sun, rises in the east. We would just be used to the fact being that the sun would rise in the west if everything
Ex-
was reversed.
exactly. Which means it's not logically necessary that the sun rises in the east just because the sun rises in the east. You can't prove that something has to be that way just because it is, right? Um, who is the vice president elect of the United States right now? Anyone?
That one guy.
Vance.
J.D. Vance, right?
Yeah. There you go.
Senator J.D. Vance is the vice president elect. Okay, so is it logically necessary that J.D. Vance is the vice president elect? Is it logically conceivable, logically possible that Tim Walz could have been the vice president elect? I'm not asking is it logical to have voted a certain way. I'm asking is it logically possible that the election could have gone that way? Sure it is, right?
Yeah.
Are you kidding? In the most polarized country on the face of the planet, predicting elections is kind of like predicting if it's going to rain in the Pacific Northwest. It can always rain, right? Middle of July, hasn't rained in 15 days, not a cloud in the sky. It can always rain. Um, so certitude is never possible in this type of argument. Okay. For example, I exist. That's a fact statement. It's pretty much an inarguable fact statement, right? I would challenge you that if you try to disprove to me my own existence, you are several kinds of fool, right? If you try to prove to me my own non existence, that's foolish because I'm standing here, or in this case, sitting here. However, the fact that I am here doesn't mean that I'm logically necessary. The universe could exist without me. And what a lonely and boring universe it would be for the rest of you. But the universe could exist without me, right?
And it has for thousands of years.
Yes. Until finally, when the world was in dire enough need, see, one of the problems that we have to be careful about when we're making arguments based on, based on the fact of our existence, is sometimes we all take ourselves too seriously and we think too much of ourselves, right? Um, anyone remember what it says in Romans chapter 12, verse 3?
Which is a reasonable service.
Uh-huh. Most people remember 1 and 2, but everybody forgets 3.
The man think not
Mm-hmm.
too highly of himself. Something.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or is that,
And then grace is given to all.
yeah, my translation of Romans 12:3 goes like this: get over yourself. Factual statements are not self-interpreting. Ooh, but we think they are, right? We make a fact statement and we think that it interprets itself, but it doesn't. In order to give meaning in a philosophical or worldview sense to a fact statement, you have to think about what the fact statement means. They don't interpret themselves. Okay. Even something as simple as saying being is being. That's a fact statement. It's not self-interpreting. What does the law of existence actually mean in terms of a worldview? Something exists. What does that mean? Well, it means that there is such a thing as existential reality. There is such a thing as existence. There is such a thing as the creation, the universe, the world, as the Greeks called it. We have to interpret those things. They are not self-interpreting. Okay. Um, for example, facts that many take to imply intelligent design in the world, such as irreducible complexity or specified complexity, do not point with necessity to a theistic designer, as even proponents of the intelligent design movement admit, right? It's one thing to say that the incredible level of design in the universe logically points to an intelligent designer as the most logical source. But it's another thing to say that it's an inescapable conclusion, that there's no other possibility. Okay. Um, I would argue that the odds of the universe as we know it existing from random chance is so mathematically improbable as to be impossible. But that's not the same thing as saying that it's actually impossible. It's just so ridiculously unlikely that if there's a more logical explanation, I would go with that. Not sure why that alarm was on today. All right, so um, even if these facts are taken to indicate the design, though, does that prove the designer is a theistic God outside the universe? Couldn't the designer of the universe, if it's so well designed, couldn't it also be a deistic God, a finite God, or an extraterrestrial type, as Francis Crick held? Or even in an immanent pantheistic or panentheistic mind inside the universe, as Sir Fred Hoyle believed? No one worldview is definitively identified by this type of an argument. Okay. I would say that even if you can make the argument for an intelligent design so well that it becomes inescapable, at best, the only worldview you're going to eliminate is atheism. Does that make sense? Because the deist actually believes in an intelligently designed universe, so you haven't disproven their worldview. Okay. Overall worldview positions must be determined by philosophical arguments that speak of the whole universe. For example, since the Big Bang Theory refers to the whole universe coming into being out of nothing, it approaches this kind of argument. And since the anthropic principle speaks of the whole universe reflecting design for the emergence of human life, from the very beginning of the universe category, it too fits into this. Okay. So the Big Bang Theory suggests that everything came into being at once. And the anthropic principle says if you look at the design of the universe, it almost seems like the universe was perfectly designed for me to live in it, right? Um, but even if those two things are true, many critics believe the argument has left the realm of science and has gone into metaphysics, which is fine with me because I'm not a scientist, I'm a philosopher. But
Well, everything dealing with the origin is, it's hard to say that it was science because it's all theoretical, because none of it can be proven experimentally. They can't recreate it, as far as that goes. So it is.
well, I don't I don't disagree that the Big Bang Theory is not very scientific, but I will say that science is theory. Um, at the end of the scientific method, all you've done is elevate a hypothesis to a theory. Science is never sure of anything. Um, there are very few scientific quote unquote laws, and even those get messed with every couple of hundred years. Almost everything in science is theory. Um, so interestingly enough, the anthropic principle also supposes itself to begin in the scientific world, but it posits a non scientific cause beyond the world. Hence, the anthropic view is really a supernatural view. Okay? There has to be a metaphysical cause. Um, so, when we are trying to argue our way into there must be a God and it must be the God as described in the Bible, we need to be careful about logical arguments because most of the time they use, and I'm going to reuse a term I used yesterday, they use non sequitur arguments. If A plus B equals C, then C minus B must equal A. That is rational, it's logical, it's reasonable. But if I said if A plus B equals C, therefore C minus 2 must equal 42, how many of you would say, wait a minute, your conclusion doesn't logically follow your argument? That's a non sequitur. The problem that we have in the realm of theism is we have too many people making non sequitur arguments for the existence of God and expecting the rest of us to back them up simply because we agree with their premise that God exists. Okay? If you make a stupid argument and you're, to put it simply, you're on my team and you're making a stupid argument, I'm probably going to be the one to call you out because stupid arguments don't help us win lost people to Jesus. Um, so, um, second, not everything from experience lacks certainty. I am certain that I exist. Okay. I cannot deny that I exist without affirming that I exist. Not everything from experience lacks certainty. There are those who say you can't base anything on experience because everything that is based on experience is uncertain. It's just your interpretation. I don't think that's accurate. It is true that in a personal life sense, certain things can be, certain experiences can be misinterpreted. However, that I exist is not really misinterpretable. Okay. Finally, the principle of existential causality is self evidently true. And that's the point. Existential causality simply means there must be a cause to existence. Existence cannot be self caused. You can state it this way: everything that has been actualized has an actualizer. Everything that passes from potentiality to actuality does so under the influence of some actuality. Or simply stated, every effect has a cause. For every effect, there must be a cause. Okay? Once one understands that an effect is something that is caused and that a cause is that which can produce an effect, then the principle of causality is as self evident as all wives are married women. Unless, of course, you live in Oregon or California. Um, all wives are married women. Self evident, at least in 1972 when this book was written. Um, I, I was caused. And if you wish, you can point to many different causes that add up to the cause of me, right? You could make the argument that I was caused by my parents procreating, giving birth to me. You could make the argument that I was caused by the day my father met my mother. You could make the argument that I was caused by Adam and Eve beginning the process of procreating the human race. You could make the argument that I was caused by many intermediate causes that led up to me. But my ultimate cause is someone created all things. There must be a cause. One need do no more than examine the nature of the subject and predicate nominative to see that the predicate nominative is reducible to the subject. They are both naming the same thing. And now we have a grammatical argument. I'll let you guys ponder that one. Um, the subject and the predicate nominative must always be the same thing, or the sentence doesn't make any sense. Okay? So, we're going to summarize the theistic argument this way. Every effect has a cause. The world is an effect. Therefore, the world has a cause. Every effect has a cause. The world is an effect. Therefore, the world has a cause. Okay. So, we've looked at the valid arguments against some theistic arguments, such as the ontological arguments, but the cosmological argument, or the argument from the principles of being, essentially come down to this. Every effect has a cause. The world is an effect. Therefore, the world has a cause. So, when atheists, polytheists, pantheists try to invalidate the argument for theism, are they successful? Yes, Ryan.
I just have one question, and I probably will have to read back to get the answer unless you want to give it to me right now. But the definition that you're using for that word cause, oh, do you have what is that definition? When it says like every effect has a cause, what's the
Yes.
definition?
So, cause would simply be that which produces the effect. Okay. Um,
Okay.
the ripple in the water was caused by what? The rock hitting the surface. The rock is the cause. I know it almost
Okay.
sounds like doublespeak. The effect is that which is caused, and the cause is that which caused the effect. But essentially, that's what we mean by causality or causation. Okay? Cause is that which causes the effect, that which produces the effect.
Okay. Thank you.
Hmm.
And in some ways, it is circular because the effect is also the cause of another effect.
Yes, which is actually one of the arguments used by those who wish to invalidate the argument for theism. Okay? We say because for every effect there must be a cause, somewhere back in history there has to have been the first cause that caused the first effect, and then you begin the dominoes falling. But what pushed over the first domino? Who stacked up the dominoes? Right? And because the first cause is the first cause, and nothing can be self-caused because you have to exist in order to cause yourself to exist, which is inconsistent with reality. Therefore, since being cannot produce non-being, the first cause is not self-caused, it's uncaused. Nothing caused the first cause, or it wouldn't be the first cause. Whatever caused it would be the first cause. But somewhere back in time, there must be the thing that caused the first cause. What tipped over the first domino? And that first cause must be an uncaused first cause. That is the crux of the argument. And guys like Immanuel Kant, guys like Hume, they try to argue against that. And their first argument is an infinite regress. Okay? Their position is, why don't you just accept that there has always been cause and effect? For eternity, there has always been cause and effect. But an infinite regress of causes is impossible. Okay? An infinite regress of current simultaneous causes of what exists here and now is clearly not possible. There may be an infinite series of causes of becoming, but not an infinite series of causes of here and now being. As long as there is a dependent being in the universe, there must be something independent on which it depends. If
But
there
if
is an,
excuse me, but if causes were, um, forever back, that means the universe would that mean the universe would be eternal?
In some form, it would mean something is eternal, because even if you take the multi-universe theory or the multiverse theory, or M theory, the idea that our 11-dimensional universe exists in a 12th dimension with an infinite number of other 11-dimensional universes, which, by the way, is not actually a multiverse. It's just a 12th dimensional universe. It's still a universe, but that's a completely different argument. Even if you accept that argument, um, you still have to have something that has always existed, right? You end up with an eternal universe. Um, so as long as there is a dependent being in the universe, there must be something independent on which it depends. If there is an existing effect, something must be affecting or causing it. No effect exists without its cause. If something existed without a cause, then it would not be an effect. It would be self-caused or uncaused. Okay? Since I am not self-caused and I am not uncaused, my existence must be affected or caused by a cause. Hence, my existence demands a current here and now cause of its continuing being. But one never reaches the needed cause by adding up effects. Even an infinite number of effects never equals a cause. No matter how many dominoes there are, something had to push the first domino. Let me say that again. No matter how many dominoes there are, something had to push the first domino. Even if you argue for an infinite number of dominoes, well, even in an infinite number of dominoes, where did the first one start? There's an infinite number of ever falling dominoes, an infinite number of effects, but no cause. Hence, no infinite series of effects, which is what a serial cause is, since every cause in an infinite series is being caused by another, can ever replace the need for a cause of that which is being caused right now, i.e., my existence. Secondly, the principle of causality is justifiable. The principle of existential causality, that every existing effect has a current cause, is justifiable. It is self-evidently true once one understands what is meant by cause and effect. A cause is that which is producing an effect, and an effect is that which is being produced by a cause. The real issue is not with seeing the self-evident validity of the principle of causality, but with showing that the world is an effect. Okay? Wow. Guys, congratulations. We just accomplished metaphysical analysis. If someone told you when you woke up this morning you're going to conduct metaphysical analysis today, what would you have thought? Aside from what is metaphysical analysis?
I would have thought I need to start drinking coffee earlier.
Yeah. Um, so I want to point out this: potentialities are actualized only by actualizers. There are many potentialities in the world, right? I am a potentiality. There are so many things I could become. I am a multitude of potentialities. But something has to happen to actualize those potentialities. They don't just actualize themselves. Okay. Um, the world might not exist. It's conceivable that there could be no world. Therefore, the world is caused by another. That is, the world is an effect. In brief, the principle of causality is either self-evident if stated as every effect has a cause, or reducible to the self-evident if stated as every contingent or finite changing being has a cause. It's either self-evident or at least reducible to the self-evident. Okay? Which brings me back to the world as a whole needs a cause. Non-theists sometimes object to the theistic argument on the basis that only parts of the world need a cause, but not the world as a whole. Have you experienced this? Have you ever had someone argue to you, maybe you need a cause, maybe I need a cause, maybe the sun and the moon need a cause, but the universe itself doesn't need a cause? So I think this is really interesting. It's a fallacy of composition. Simply because each part of a puzzle is triangular does not mean the whole puzzle is triangularly shaped. Okay, you can take a bunch of triangles and you can make a square, right? If you have enough triangles, you can fit them together and you can make a square. Um, yeah, but that argument doesn't really apply because what we're talking about is not the shape, but the nature of the parts. Okay, the nature of the parts demands that the world be caused. Um, the very nature of brown floor tile, a whole floor of them must also be brown, right? If I make a floor out of nothing but brown tiles, what color is the floor? Unless I do something to cause a different color, the floor is brown. By the very nature of a wooden table, if each part is made of wood, then the whole table must be wooden. So if it is that by the very nature of effects or cause things, the whole group of them needs a cause just as much as any one of them does. Okay. Um, Another way to put that is, where did the parts of the wooden table come from? Where did they get the wood to make the table leg? Perhaps a tree? How many of you think it's likely that the leg, the wooden leg of a wooden table, that the wooden leg, the wood came from the tree? You think that's reasonable? Yeah. Okay.
I thought China.
China. It's very possible it came from China. But if all of the table is wooden, then all of the table came from trees, even if they were different trees, right? The nature of the effects require certain causes. Okay. Um, it is possible that the world might not exist. The world as a whole is contingent. And whatever is contingent is dependent on a cause beyond it. Hence, there must be a cause beyond the whole world on which it depends. So, is it conceivable that the world did not exist? I don't mean is it conceivable that it doesn't exist now because we're here in it. I mean, could there have never been a universe? Could there have never been a world? Is that conceivable?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely it is. Therefore, it is contingent. Therefore, it is dependent on a cause. If the world could have not existed, something outside of the world had to cause its existence. If the universe could have not existed, something outside of the universe had to cause its existence. Whether you're talking about the 11-dimensional universe that we live in, or you're talking about a 12th dimensional universe in which that 11-dimensional space exists, you still have the same problem. Multiverse doesn't change that. Okay. It's conceivable that it does not exist, that it didn't have to exist. Therefore, it's dependent on a cause because it's by definition contingent. All right. Um,
Conceivable. So, the more complicated, the more complex the item is, the less, I mean, the more it would be depending upon something else to have, brought it into existence. So I don't know how to say it, but if you take something, as complex as the universe, and you look at all the different elements involved with it, I mean, that's a pretty diverse amount of atoms and chemistry and all of that that's involved with it. Um, the the cause has to be uh, equally as complex. I don't know if equally is a good is right there, but I mean, the more complex, you would think that it would be more. There's got to be a connection there.
So some non-theists use the triangle argument. A triangle is more than its parts. The parts of a triangle: three angles, three sides, or three sides that make three angles, or three angles that make three sides. The parts, you say, well, you have three straight lines, those make a triangle. Okay. Um, a three-sided figure. All the parts, all the parts are necessary, or all the parts are contingent, but the whole is not contingent. That's the argument. They say the parts depend on the whole, but the whole is necessary. The parts are contingent. Okay. Um, Now, Geisler says this is a backdoor kind of theism, but actually, I think this is not an argument for atheism. This is an argument for pantheism. The universe is God. The universe is the eternal cause. And if the universe is the uncaused eternal cause, then you're back to the pantheistic worldview that the universe is God. But by admitting that the whole of the universe transcends or is equal to more than the parts, then they are saying that the whole is both eternal and necessary because all the parts depend on it. They have admitted that there is something that is transcendent, eternal, and necessary, a cause on which everything in the universe depends for its existence. But that's what the pantheist believes in their God universe model. Okay? So they really haven't disproven the existence of God. They've simply backdoored their way into pantheism. The universe is God. Okay? The non-theist couched the description of God by the phrase the universe as a whole. But he's actually meaning the same thing as a creator. He's just calling the universe the creator. There is no no four-term fallacy in the theistic argument. Actually, before we get to that, let me go back to this for a moment. Um, does a triangle exist? Does a triangle exist anywhere in the universe?
Yeah, I would think so.
Have you ever seen a triangle?
Yes.
Really? I've never seen a triangle. A triangle is a two-dimensional object. Two-dimensional objects do not exist. They're only conceptions. We can draw a picture of a triangle, but you can't actually make one. Because even if you take a piece of paper that is very thin and you cut out what looks like a triangle, um, turn it sideways, it has three dimensions. So trying to argue about a real universe using a theoretical shape of an object that cannot exist is actually a fruitless argument. Okay? A circle does not exist because a circle is a two-dimensional argument, a two-dimensional object. A circle is the concept we have of something that is round. All right.
So you're based not based upon the definition of a triangle or the definition of a circle, but the reality of it.
Yeah. So essentially, what I'm saying is definitionally, a three-sided object or a three-angled object can hypothetically exist, but it does not exist in the natural universe. There are no two-dimensional objects. Everything has at least three spatial dimensions, right?
Okay.
So we
My
should
first
be,
grade teacher fibbed to me the whole time when we went through these shapes.
yep,
She was my favorite too.
man. Um, yeah, I would challenge you to try to make a square. If you try to make a square, you're going to fail. You can draw a picture of a square, but to actually make a square does it does not exist because it has the thickness of the paper. That means it has three dimensions, therefore it's not a square. All right, there is no four-term fallacy in the theistic argument. What in the world is a four-term fallacy? So, some non-theists have insisted that the argument for theism equivocates on the term cause. They insist that the word cause in the premises means finite cause, but in the conclusion means infinite cause. So, what is a four-term fallacy? But the meaning of the same term may not be broader or different in the conclusion than in the premises. Therefore, the conclusion of an infinite God is invalidly drawn from the premises of the argument. Okay? So, the idea of a four term fallacy is essentially, in brief, the idea that you're changing the definition of your terms between your argument and your conclusion. In this case, however, they miss the meaning of cause in the premises. Okay? In the premises, cause, we simply mean the actuality, whether finite or infinite, which produces an effect. We are not saying finite causes cause finite effects or that infinite causes cause infinite effects. We are simply saying effects are caused, and therefore every effect has a cause, and therefore causes cause effect. Okay? We're not getting into whether the cause is infinite or the effect is infinite, whether it's finite, whether the cause is finite or the effect is finite. That's not even in the argument. We're simply saying for every effect, there is a cause. For every actuality, there is a cause because every actuality is an effect. So it's an open question as to whether it is infinite or finite. Our argument does not require that we define the cause as infinite or finite when we say it just demands a cause. But as it turns out, the conclusion demands a not finite kind of cause, which is causing everything else that exists. Okay? So we never said in the premises that it had to be an infinite cause or it had to be a finite cause. But in the conclusion, it was inescapable that there had to be an infinite cause. Because every finite thing needs a cause, hence the first cause must be not finite. Can anyone think of an example of a finite thing that wouldn't need a cause? One finite thing, one limited thing that doesn't need a cause.
Coffee.
Oh no, coffee has a cause. It's a gift from God.
Yeah, it has a cost, but I don't. But it doesn't need one because you just need it. You know, you don't really. I guess you really don't even need it. You to drink it. That's what I was thinking.
Is the question what infinite?
No,
What
name one finite thing that doesn't need a cause. One finite thing that exists that doesn't need a cause.
God?
God is not finite.
Uh-uh.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All finite things need a cause. No one can
That's
think of
right.
a single example of a finite thing that doesn't need a cause. The only
Mhm.
the only kind of existence that can be uncaused is an infinite existence. Must be eternal, must be infinite. Because if you put any kind of definition, any kind of finitude on it, it suddenly needs a cause. Okay? Hence, the first cause must be not finite. But since it does not have a cause, it must be a not finite, i.e., infinite, cause of all finite things. Therefore, an infinite cause is possible on the premises, but not necessitated by, uh, I just lost my place, by the conclusion of the argument. No four term fallacy has occurred. Okay. The terms necessary being and uncaused cause are not meaningless. I think this is one of the most interesting arguments that I've heard from a non theist. Some non theists will insist that the terms necessary being and uncaused cause and their equivalents have no meaning. Necessity, they claim, cannot be a characteristic of existence. Necessity is a logical, but not an ontological category. Whenever someone has to use big words like it's logical, but not ontological, um, you know that they are running into academia because their argument is failing. Um, okay. There are several ways to respond to this. First of all, what he means by a logical category is it's a category that is based on reason and rationality that you can logically conclude. Um, necessity is a logical category, but the argument is it's not an ontological category. It doesn't have to exist. There, there doesn't have to be necessity. Okay. Um, first, the theist might claim that God is not a logically necessary being, but the statement God exists is a logically necessary statement. We could say we could say God is not a logically necessary being, but the statement God exists is a logically necessary statement. In this case, either the non-theist contention is self-defeating or else it does not really succeed in eliminating the possibility that some logically necessary statements about existence are possible. It sounds counterintuitive to me to say it's not God is not a logically necessary being, right? Does anybody else find that counterintuitive? I mean, it seems totally illogical to me to suggest that God doesn't exist necessarily. So how can we say God is not logically necessary? Well, let me ask you this. Why is God necessary? Make the logical argument for why God is necessary in 2 sentences. Anyone?
He forms us in our mother's wombs.
Okay.
If he wasn't necessary, then he won't be God. That's not consistent with the word God.
Right, but why does God have to exist at all?
Because then we wouldn't exist.
Ah,
That's right.
so in order for God to be a necessary being, you have to start with something exists, right? But if nothing existed, then God would not be necessary, right? So it's the statement God exists is a logically necessary statement, even though God is not a logically necessary being. Okay. It is conceivable that there could be no God, but then it would necessarily follow that nothing else exists either. Okay. So, yeah, it's not, God is not a logically necessary being, but the statement God exists is a logically necessary statement because something else exists. Okay. Um, so the idea that we have a logical category of necessity is not really part of our argument. Okay. Second, the non-theist argument confuses two kinds of necessity: logical necessity and ontological necessity. We've already conceded that no reality that no reality, God included, is logically necessary. Okay, you could logically say there could be a reality where nothing exists, including God. I might say that's an unreality, but you could logically say that it is conceivable that there could be nothing, right? Um, the non theist has not proved that there's any contradiction regarding the meaningfulness of an actually necessary being. The only way to understand necessary being as contradictory is to view the being it refers to as self caused rather than uncaused. That's the problem. The non theist cannot get out of their head the idea that God is self caused. But we don't make that argument. No theist says God caused himself to exist. An eternal being has no cause. He is not his own cause, he is uncaused. That's what eternal means. There was never a cause for God. He is not his own cause, he is uncaused. But at the end of the day, all of these kinds of arguments come back to the non theist cannot escape the idea that God must be self caused. Okay? Neither are the terms necessary being and uncaused cause purely negative or vacuous concepts devoid of all positive being. There is a negative element in the concept, but it is not entirely negative. God is not finite. This is the negative element. But God is a cause whose essence is pure actuality, knowing good, and so on. These are all positive attributions. That is, our positive knowledge of the term God is provided by the similarity God bears to all perfections in the created being by way of the efficient causal connection. However, since God is a not finite kind of cause, knower, good, and so on, these positive attributes must be affirmed of God in an infinite or unlimited way. And finally, Geisler says, it is self defeating to deny any meaning to the term God. The proposition the term God is not a meaningful term is either meaningless, since we do not know what God means in the statement, or else self-defeating, because it supposes that we do know what God means in the very statement affirming that we do not know what God means. Okay, um, this is an interesting one. When they say the term God is not a meaningful term, it doesn't have intrinsic meaning. It means whatever you say it means. It means whatever I say it means, or it has no real meaning at all. Um, Actually, I think Geisler did a pretty good job in this chapter of defining God. We looked at that part of the chapter yesterday, right? What is a God? When we say something is a God or the God, what do we mean? How do we define a God? The answer is worthy of worship, right? A God is someone or something that is worshipped by someone. Someone or something that is worshipped by someone. God, the theistic God, is worthy of worship because he made all things, because he is infinitely good, and because he has infinite value, and therefore he is worthy of worship. So God does mean something, and we do know what God means. So either the non theist must show that God is a contradictory concept, such as square circles. Everyone knows what a squared circle is, so I don't know why he uses that. A squared circle is a wrestling ring. Everybody knows that. Um, or else, no meaningful statement can be made denying. I'm just kidding, by the way. Square circles. A circle has no sides. A square has four sides, so a square circle does not exist. But then again, neither a square nor a circle exists because they're two-dimensional objects, but that's a whole other issue. But if God is conceived as an uncaused being, there is no contradiction in the concept. If there were, then the statement the universe always existed, which many non-theists hold in some form, would also be meaningless. Further, the terms self-caused, caused by another, and uncaused are logically exclusive categories. There are no other possibilities. So, what do you think about this? Can something be both self-caused and caused by another? No.
By definition, no.
No, because they're opposites, right? Can something be uncaused and caused by another? No. Can something be uncaused and self-caused? No. So these are three mutually exclusive, logically exclusive categories. So it would be contradictory to view God as caused by another, since God, the theistic God, is the first cause, and first causes have no causes before or behind them. And it is contradictory to view God as self caused, for a cause is ontologically prior to its effect, but no being can be ontologically prior to itself. Therefore, the only remaining view, i.e., God is uncaused, must be non contradictory, since the categories of self caused, caused, and uncaused are logically exhaustive of reality. In other words, everything must be either self caused, caused by another, or uncaused. Okay? God cannot be viewed as caused by another because he's the first cause. God cannot be viewed as self caused because self caused violates the principles of existence. Being cannot produce non being. You have to exist in order to cause your own existence. Therefore, self caused is logically impossible. If he cannot be caused by another and he cannot be self caused, then just by the process of elimination, God has to be uncaused. It is impossible for all views about reality to be contradictory, see chapter 1, at least one position about reality must be possible. For the affirmation that no position about reality is possible is self-destructive, since it too is a position about reality. Okay? In other words, there are 7 basic views of the world. One of them has to be right. 6 of them have to be wrong. There cannot be 7 incorrect worldviews because we've eliminated all the other possibilities of what the world can be, where it came from, and what existence means. Any meaningful denial of the law of non-contradiction of reality is itself a non-contradictory statement about reality. But if it is impossible to deny that reality is non-contradictory, then whenever all other logical possible views about reality turn out to be impossible, the only remaining view cannot be logically contradictory. Therefore, God as an uncaused being cannot be a logically non-contradictory concept. Okay? And that brings us to the end of our time for the day. I was hoping to get through the contingency, necessity, and act potency model, but that's all right. We'll address those on Monday. Coming up on the end of class, I hope your essays are coming well. Reach out to me if you need help. Remember, the topic of the first essay is not metaphysics, it is methodologies. Okay? That essay is about the 7 methodologies of how people will do apologetics, how they will defend their worldview. Within the Christian worldview, within the theistic worldview, or any other worldview, how worldviews are defended, those methodologies is what the first essay is about. Second essay is about the 7 worldviews. So, well, actually, it's about a defense of theism, so it focuses on theism as opposed to the other worldviews. If you have questions about those, please send me a message, schedule a time to talk. Let me help you work through any questions you have about those. Any other questions before or comments before we go?
I probably won't be here for history. I need to run up and see if I can get my hearing aids worked on.
Okay. Thank you for
Will it be
letting me
okay?
know.
So,
Thank you for letting me
When
know.
is it?